Welcome to the Generous Business Owner Podcast, where business owners gain inspiration and encouragement to live a legacy, not just leave one. And now your hosts, Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. My name's Jeff Thomas, and we have a very special treat, a twofer. Jeff Rutt, the founder of Keystone Homes and also Hope International, and the current president and CEO of Hope International, Peter Greer. Jeff, welcome to the program.
Hey, everybody.
And Peter, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Jeff.
So this is going to be fun. This is some inside baseball. A lot of times, almost every week we have some outside business owner kind of telling their, war stories on how they try to use their business platform for generosity. But this week, Jeff, of course, Rutt is a co-host of the program. Peter Greer has been a great friend of the program, and those guys, of course, have known each other for decades through Hope International. But recently, I went with a couple of our employees at Arcos down to El Salvador and saw the work Hope International was doing along with Compassion International. It was just a really special experience. And I came back just all fired up about it. And the three of us talked about it and decided to just do this podcast, basically under the title of Why Take Your Employees on a Vision Trip? And these guys, frankly, have a lot more experience than I do. So I asked them if I could just interview them about this. And so maybe to get started, Jeff Rutt, not everybody kind of knows the background of Keystone and your relationship starting Hope. Can you give us a little bit of that background to get us started?
Sure. Yeah, Jeff, I'll give you the quick, fastest 2 minutes in podcast here background. So I was born in southern Lancaster County. Grew up on a dairy farm. My dad taught me the value of hard work and discipline at around 10 years of age, which I appreciated. Years later, didn't really appreciate it.
Years, comma, years later, yes.
Kind of a dysfunctional childhood at 13. My mom picked up my siblings at school one day and left me a note and said, "Hey, call me if you want to join." And so I decided to spend my teenage years with my dad on the dairy farm, kind of broken, but leaning into my faith in Jesus. 20 years old, I literally bought the farm before I knew what that meant. And turns out after 10 years, my wife and I realized 300 bovines are very needy. So I was looking for something with lower risk and less hours. My wife and I had done a lot of praying. Let us spend a lot of time on our knees, just trying to figure out what was next. And we weren't really getting the answers to our prayers the way at least we thought they should be answered. We wondered what God was up to. But during that time, I thought, let's look for something with lower risk and less hours. Maybe real estate and home building would be a good choice.
Not cyclical.
No,
really easy.
No
everything's always on time, under budget. There couldn't be an easier business.
So in 1992, we started Keystone Custom Homes. Around that time, I had led a group from our church to send containers of food and medical supplies to our sister church in Ukraine. And we were inadvertently, unintentionally creating a cycle of anticipation, expectation, entitlement, and dependency. And Pastor Petrenko sat us down in the mid-90s and said, "Your helping is hurting." And that one comment shifted our whole approach. We started investing in the dreams of the families we were serving by empowering them with as low as $20 investment in a loan that helped them have dignity restored in their lives and become pillars in their own communities. So that organization, Hope International, that we started at the time, continued to grow, but it didn't grow super fast at the time. We were kind of just struggling like a lot of early, upstart young nonprofits. But in 2004, God sent us a hungry, humble, smart Harvard grad who's written over 15 books now, I think, including Mission Drift and Rooting for Rivals. Hope International's raised over $275 million, but has loaned out over $1.6 billion. But it all comes down to those individual families that we're serving. And that is what has gotten me so excited through the years, is seeing that impact. And that is truly, in my mind, the answer to prayer that I prayed, when I started really realizing that in the mid 2000s. That was, all of a sudden I had a aha moment and said, that was the answer to my prayer that I prayed like 17
Ah,
years earlier.
wow.
But seeing that impact is something that comes back to your question, Jeff. I just love taking folks, whether it's my family, when our kids started as young as 4 years old, to our teams of our employees who we're getting ready to leave in about 8 days. Actually, there's 32 of us headed to Zimbabwe and Zambia, and we love taking families to see the front line of what God's doing around the world, and it's just has such a huge impact, especially for teenagers. If you're a teenager, or if you think you're a teenager, um, in mind, it just has a huge impact. It completely takes the wind out of your not fair speech. And it's just, it's awesome to see what God's doing and to see firsthand the contentment and the joy in the families we serve around the world. And firsthand to get to meet them, shake their hand, talk with them, ask them questions, have them ask you questions, and just really get to experience that firsthand.
So, and we'll come back to this, Jeff. Thanks for sharing that backstory. It never gets old to me. But just at a high level, what is kind of your home building business, Keystone Homes? Do you have sort of an overarching policy about taking employees? You have like one a quarter, one a year, just an overview of how do you invite employees to participate?
Yeah. So years ago, we set up a kind of a guideline that if you've been at the company for 5 years, you get to go on a trip to Dominican
Oh, that's
Republic.
cool.
You get to bring a +1 with you. And if you want to pay, you can bring like as many kids, friends, relatives, whoever you want. And we have a lot of people take us up on that. And then if you've been there 10 years, you get to go to Africa, somewhere in Africa. So that's the milestone trip we're taking right now, is Africa. We just recently reduced the first milestone to 3 years.
Okay.
We talked about it internally, and we just wanted to get our team kind of, just because of the way we're structured, we're approximately 90% owned by charity, and a lot of the profit for purpose goes to support the families we're visiting. We just wanted to get our folks to the front line sooner. So 3 years and 10 years are those milestones.
And how often? Is it once a year?
So well, COVID kind of interrupted that a little
Yeah,
bit.
in a normal year.
Yes, not once a year, but I would say at least every other year.
Okay. Okay. I think that's really helpful for people listening I mean, how do I even frame this thing? How do I get started? I mean, there's so many questions, and we were talking before we started getting recorded. We understand that this might be kind of on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe a level 8 kind of discussion, because it already kind of assumes you have a culture in something that you're passionate about as a company, and that sort of thing, to start taking people. Peter, let's kind of kick it to you. You have the advantage of leading Hope and seeing this growth over almost 2 decades now, and to watch other sort of corporate partners or just individual givers with their companies get involved. What are some of the other ways you've seen those folks use vision trips with their employees?
Yeah, well, one of the things that I've had a front row seat to is to watch the way that Jeff has engaged Keystone
Yeah.
and the incredible team there and his family. And I know this is not the point of today's conversation, but I just want to put an exclamation point on that experience with your kids. When I think about my youth, I got to go on some international experiences, and they were transformative. They planted some seeds in terms of international engagement. And just as Jeff said, this idea that there is a big world out there and your world that you're living in might not be the way that it is for families around the world. So yeah, I know not the topic today, but
Well,
maybe
but I
even on
think it
some of these
speaks to
trips.
it does speak to the perspective that it
Yes,
gives. One of the
yes.
things that you guys are both saying that's resonating with me. I loved what Jeff said about it takes the wind out of the not fair speech. I love that line. But what does it replace that with?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and I think the other thing, Jeff, that I've seen is that there is the Gallup organization, when they did their global research, they looked at there are 12 questions that if you answer positively to these 12 questions, there's going to be greater employee engagement. And one that I think is so interesting is this one where it says, does the mission purpose of your company make you feel your job is important? If you believe that what you're doing is important in terms of what it is building, what it is creating, what it is doing around the world, you are far more likely to be an engaged employee. And I think that's one of the incredible benefits of these trips is you get to see if your company is involved in some sort of philanthropy and some sort of engagement, if part of the profits are being used to build a better world, um, allowing more employees to not hear about it, but to see it, to experience it. I think that has a profound impact. When you come back to work after the trip and when you do your work, I don't think you do it in exactly the same way. I think you remember about what is being accomplished, yes, through the company, yes, in the way that it engages with customers, but also what it is doing. So I think even as a tool for direct engagement, I think it's powerful for people to see and experience. And just lastly, I think, Jeff, you've seen this too, but you can be talking about what you do internationally. You can be
Yeah.
talking about your philanthropy. But if you have not seen it, if you have not experienced it, I think it stays at a head knowledge and it never gets to a heart experience. And these trips have a way of opening up the heart, not just more information, but seeing it, smelling it, tasting it, experiencing it in a way that you never could do if you were not physically there. So powerful experiences, and I should stop because I can keep going on.
No, no.
We have
We'll
seen
definitely
how
come back
powerful
to you.
they
But
are.
the question that prompts for me is maybe back to you, Jeff Rudd, is as Peter's describing this sort of head to heart and really taking it to a deeper level for the employees and then their engagement. I mean, obviously that can lead to some benefits that we were talking about before we were recording, like employee retention. I mean, even if you're not as passionate about the work, I mean, if you were just cold-blooded and just said, I want a program to retain employees, this would probably be a good strategy. But obviously there's many more benefits. But Jeff, what are some of the benefits you've seen by taking employees? What are maybe some of the head stories from a business owner perspective, but also maybe the heart transformation stories that you've seen from employees?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think of is the contentment that I see on the faces of the families that we visit, and the contentment that our trippers, the
Yeah.
pilgrims going on our trips with us, and which makes me think of Kristen Welch's book, Raising Grateful Kids in an Entitled World.
Mhm.
And in some ways, we're all kids.
Yeah.
We're still, I don't know about you guys, but I'm still trying to figure stuff out. And, I'm trying to figure out how to be grateful instead of entitled. And so I think just having that mindset of being open to looking at, you know, when you meet some of the families, it's not like you're going to take pictures of, kids that are starving that have flies on their face. These are very content, joy-filled families that are like engaged in what they're doing. I could have been born in Choma, Zambia,
Yeah.
and be, farming maize, instead of here in, Lancaster County. That could have been me. And it really helps you relate to, wow, this is a very small world. It just really opens up the mind and the heart. So I think getting there, I think as Peter said, It's one thing to see a video, to sit in a meeting at your company, quarterly meeting, and see, oh, that's an amazing work our company's doing, and that goes to the head. When you get the heart comes when you're getting ready to leave. You've gotten to know some of these families. You've gotten to know Anastasia. You've gotten to know Andre. You've gotten to know, um, Francis. You've gotten to know some of these folks, and it's time to leave. And you're like, I just made a friend that I now have on the other side of the world, and I can WhatsApp them. I can, whatever. You can stay in touch with them so easily today, and the world just got so much smaller, and it makes some of the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis seem like first world problems, because they are first world problems.
Yeah. Well, they shrink, right?
They
So
shrink.
they don't go away, but they shrink with that
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah. And I feel like it, in a lot of ways, from a very practical standpoint, it de-stresses uh, a lot of the issues that we're just so, bent out of shape about, wrapped around the axle about something that's happening. Whatever the challenge is that you're dealing with, I promise you, it'll fade. It'll seem so much less important, so much lower a priority once you come back from one of these trips.
You know, it's so interesting. I think I came into this discussion, I think, thinking a little bit too much head myself, actually,
Mm.
in this sort of engagement as a corporate thing to do. And what I keep hearing from you guys, especially Jeff, with that kind of story, is this sort of self transformation, this sort of internal transformation of the person, not so much about like almost a byproduct is how they feel about the company that provided that opportunity, but it's more about personal transformation and that sort of thing. Am
It
I on the
is.
right track? How
And
would you
I
think of it?
and I agree with that. And I think it comes down, in my mind, it comes down to
Yeah.
the individuals. For me, early on, I got a chance to learn to know Nadia from Ukraine, who got a small loan to start a clothing business. And she saw an opportunity to expand, and she expanded into having a department selling Portland cement. And when she went to talk to her loan officer 18 months later, she said, I won't be needing any more loans because I'm not poor anymore. And, the two Muslim women in Rwanda who are so ecstatic about their sneaker businesses, but they would sit outside during the worship and word part of the meetings. But through time, were influenced and impacted by the loan officer. They got loved in through the loan officer and the other believers in the group, to the point where those two Muslim women came to Christ through that interaction and through that loan cycle. And then, of course, one of my favorite, clients, Anastasia in Burundi, who could not afford to send her two little girls to school, but leveraged a $20 loan into a wedding business that now has 200 chairs, 200 place settings, and 200 baskets, and 3 wedding dresses, small, medium, and large. And she's just thriving. So when you get to know Anastasia and these two women in Kigali and Nadia, when you get to know them personally, it's not about numbers on a page. It's about real people and real hearts. And you just it's hard to not have that impact you.
So good, Jeff. Peter, coming back to you from the seat you're in, running this really growing nonprofit and more corporate engagement, you know, it takes resources. It's not cheap to fly people, employees to these areas and pay for the lodging and all of the transport and all that. But it also takes resources from nonprofits like Hope to have people meet them there and to plan it and to put the visit together and prepare people for those visitors. And so it takes resources from Hope and other nonprofits to host these trips. How do you think about the value of that investment from the nonprofits side?
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the parts of this podcast that I love is this is the Generous Business Owner Podcast. And I appreciate how you guys have a conversation on generosity that is certainly inclusive of the financial way that people are living a life of generosity. But since when is generosity just contained
Yeah.
to the financial piece? And I think these trips is an opportunity to be generous with experiences with your employees. It's an opportunity to be generous in not just you having the experience. This is stating it too harshly, but if your company has been involved in giving and raising the resources, and you're the only one who's been able to see or experience the good that's happening around the world,
Mm.
is it possible that that might be not a model of generosity if you've
Mm.
never invited in other individuals that are helping generate the resources that are used for all this? So I think it's a generosity, and I have seen this too. This is never an obligation. It's never
Yes.
you have to. It's would you like to? It's extending invitation, and there will be some members of your team that will not be ready right now. Maybe in a future point, but extending the invitation. Would you like to? And I just love how Jeff had this set up as the milestone program. I think that is brilliant on that. But yeah, I think in terms of the question, it does take resources. It takes time and it takes resources for the organization as well as for the company. And I would say a couple things. One, preparation matters.
Yeah.
And if you are not doing any preparation, it is possible for these trips to cause harm for the organization because they are not treating the individuals that are served with respect. They've not been kind of introduced into the context that they're sharing, some cultural sensitivity perhaps. And so at a minimum, I would say these trips have to do no harm. You have to do the work ahead of time to prepare, and you have to do the work afterwards to reflect and make sure that you're
Mm.
maximizing the good. But my experience is this is an incredible investment because more people understand, more people see. And just as Jeff said, this is not just about the financial component, but is it possible that this is part of loving your employees? Is it possible that there might actually be some real significant work that happens in the lives of your team? Maybe they might be open to things that they would not have time to really think about, or maybe a new environment opens up something. And so I would just say, lastly, if you're considering having an all-inclusive resort with an open bar for your employees as a thank you, or having the opportunity to bring them on a trip, try both.
Yeah.
Tell me which has fewer regrets. Tell me which has greater engagement, and
Yeah.
tell one which one of those two would you choose
That is a
forward.
perfect segue. Thank you, Peter, because I was sitting here thinking about the way we made our decision to do our very first vision trip at Arcos. And the model I had in my head, Peter, you nailed it, was I spent 25 years at these big firms where the top producers got taken on the luxurious resort trips. And as God sort of got a hold of my heart and was sort of pushing me in a different direction, I dreaded those trips. Actually, I just, it's just, I don't know. It just didn't do anything for me from a motivational standpoint. And in fact, I felt like they were wasting money on things I didn't even want to do. And so I thought, okay, well, I don't want to do that, but how are we going to invite people? Like, how do we do our first screen? Like we've only been around, 6 years when we decided to do this. So I don't have any 10-year employees, and I didn't have any of those things. So in my brain, at the end of 22, when we sort of announced as a company we were going to support these organizations, Hope and Compassion, this sort of joint work in El Salvador, we invited people to defer a piece of their annual bonus to support it if they wanted to, and we would match it. Okay, and so we did that, and it really surprised me who some of the biggest givers were. And I'll never forget, actually, not who I expected. And so I thought, well, gosh, we'll invite the biggest giver. That was it. In my head, I thought, well, we'll just invite the people with the biggest dollar amount. That's what we'll do, because clearly they care the most. But of course, there's a widow's mite deal to this. As a percentage of their overall income, that would have been a different thing. But I was really, honestly, I'm embarrassed to admit, I was looking at the absolute dollar number. And I thought, well, in my brain, luckily I didn't say it out loud, but in my brain, I was thinking, well, that's maybe who we should invite. So I'm not the head of our giving committee. Actually, one of our employees is. And so we had a call, and I asked him, who do you think we should invite? And I thought he had a brilliant idea. He said, his name's Chip Brackley. He said, let's invite all the admin people that would never get to go on anything and would never pay for themselves to go. And I thought, that's exactly the opposite of the way the world does it. And I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. What we actually ended up doing is inviting those people and a couple of the bigger givers who we knew were super engaged and were constantly asking, can I go? Can I go? Can I go? So we kind of did a hybrid trip, but we started thinking of it. I didn't really think of it this way. I was just thinking of it as a sort of a transformational thing, sort of a fulfillment thing. I didn't think of it as an award trip. And he's like, this is an award trip. Like, just Jeff, I mean, it's a little bit of a reward for being around. Like you stayed around for 3 years, you stayed around for 10 years. Jeff, do you frame this as, I mean, how do you talk about it? This is a benefit to being here. How do you know what I mean? How do you frame it to the employee?
Yeah, I mean, and as Peter referenced that, some folks decide not to go.
Yeah.
For whatever
That
reason,
happened.
they might not be ready, or it's just like, fear of the unknown.
Well, some of the locations are scary by internet standards.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, for someone who's traveled
Yeah.
extensively like myself, so going to Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe is like, who wouldn't want to go to Victoria Falls, But if you haven't been out of the country, which,
Yeah.
a fair amount of Americans
That's
have
true.
not been out of the country. I don't know what the percentage is, but there is a sense of adventure, when someone comes on and someone's learning to know the culture, that, hey, I'm looking forward to my, trip to Dominican Republic or trip to Africa, somewhere in Africa. And the cool part about it, and I think this is key if you're considering doing this, is partner with an organization like Hope International or another organization that can get you in to meet with families on the front line. Don't take a trip and just be a tourist. I mean, that's fine if you want to be a tourist somewhere. I would encourage you that if you really want to get the most out of it, get to know folks on the ground that are not necessarily catering, to the Americans or to the other tourists that are coming in from other parts of the world. Get to know real families that live there, that are dealing with the real challenges of everyday life. And I think, again, there's a lot more to learn and a lot more to unpack there that just makes the world a smaller place. We all serve a sovereign God. We all worship in very similar ways. It's amazing. We like to think about sometimes when we were getting ready to go on a trip like this, how all the differences, how things are so different, in the places we're going to go. But when you really start listing the similarities and, where our hearts are, all the things that we want for each other in our families, we want healthy families, we want education, we want the next generation to have, faith in Jesus. There's, we pray for each other. We want health for our families. We want to help our neighbor. There's just so many things that are similar, and the world becomes so much smaller. And I feel like it's easier to love your neighbor, whether that neighbor is across the street or across in a different continent.
So good. Peter, the one of the things that I'm thinking about is I'm thinking of one of the women that went on the trip we recently got back from, and there's we don't interact all day every day on a normal basis. And now when I pass her desk, I feel like we kind of have this shared experience that we can reference at any time that'll bring a smile to our faces. And talk about, Jeff, like you said, somebody that we met or a story or that. You've been on a ton of these with all kinds of groups, obviously families, people that don't know each other, but also the corporate ones. Can you speak to that sort of shared experience? How do you see those relationships being built between the visitors, if you will? Can you speak to that a little bit, what you've seen there?
I'd be happy to, but I don't need to because you just shared it. Jeff,
Yeah.
say more. What do you think that was? What is it about a shared experience that allows those relationships to go to just a deeper level? What was it on that trip? What contributed to that?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Yeah, thanks for throwing it back to me. So one of the admin ladies, very highly educated, but she said something out loud that I think was in my head, and I told her so. But she said it first, which was, you know, I had read Friedman's "The World Is Flat" years ago, right? And you guys are big world travelers. For those out there that don't really know that reference, it was a book written many years ago that was talking about how, you know, the Googles of the world will find you if you're a good programmer, no matter where you are on the planet. Okay, so the playing field is leveling globally, and I think to a certain extent that might be true, but it is not 100% true. And these trips to the poorest, to visit the poorest of the poor, illustrate this. And so I had a thought in my head that I did not express first, but this woman who went with us did. She said, you know, after the trip on our way back, she said, you know, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I really figured if they're this poor, they must not be that smart.
Hmm.
She said it out, and she's a very God-fearing, wonderful person. But I sort of chuckled because I thought, wow, you said it out loud like I was afraid to kind of say it, you know? And we met this one woman was in a giving group, and I mean, it's the proverbial chicken situation. You guys have probably seen hundreds of these, but I'd heard of these things. But we literally had this woman who was a mother and it just had her third baby, and she had 3 chickens, and the giving group, she took a loan, and she now has 100 chickens, you know? And I go, well, where are the chickens? And she's like, they're in my backyard. I was like, I haven't seen too many big backyards. And I'm like, well, who runs all this operation? She's like, my family. I'm employing the whole family. And I was like, take me through the economics. How much does it cost to buy a chick? How long do they gestate or grow? How much is the feed? How much is 3 months later do you sell them for? I'm like, that's a pretty sweet margin, you know? She's like, boom, like on Shark Tank, nailing the numbers, you know? And at the end, I turned to everybody after she talked. I was like, can we hire her? Like, can she get back on the plane with us? I was like, this is amazing. And so, like, we have that story in common. Like, where's Maria? You know, like, we need to hire somebody. Let's go get her. You know, like so that's just a little one of 100 tiny experiences where you can reference. We had a hilarious story, even the funny stuff that happens. That's not like that, a learning experience, but just at one church, they had us get on stage and introduce ourselves, and we had to pretend to be an animal, and the kids would like try to figure out what it was and yell it out. Okay, that was just like a little icebreaker thing. Okay, so like they popped it on us at the last second. What's your favorite animal? And anyway, so that became a running joke because one of the animals that was picked was this obscure animal, and we were laughing forever about why would you pick an obscure animal that you can't make the noise? So it was just, we just had so much fun with it. So these are inside jokes. So like literally next week we're having the whole company in, and we give these, we call it the Arkies, these little silly sort of like office awards, you know, but a bunch of them are from the people that went, that are inside jokes from the trip.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
And so bonding. It just, I can't put that into words. The camaraderie that builds it cuts through every level of the organization and all of that. I mean, Jeff, you're probably thinking of things like that. I mean, what comes to mind when I say that?
Oh yeah. No. There's just so much bonding.
Yeah.
And Peter, you've seen that in a lot of the trips that you've led.
Yeah. Well, I think that's amazing. So, Jeff, any other thoughts before we kind of wrap it up here? You know, let's do it this way. The way we always close this podcast is with a practical tip. So I'm trying, you know, because a lot of times these stories, as you guys know, I mean, we have these giant highs, giant lows. Usually, if we have them on the podcast, they're not totally in the barrel at the moment. But sometimes you can get to the end of it and go, well, what am I supposed to do tomorrow? So, Jeff, maybe we start with you. What would be just a practical tip? You know, maybe it's just a simple, if they're thinking about doing this kind of thing, where do they start?
Yeah. So I would encourage you, if you're thinking about any kind of a reward, any kind of a goal for a team, for an individual, if you're thinking about choices on sending them, on a cruise to Disney, to some kind of a normal trip, ski trip, whatever, think about this as at least
Mm,
as an option.
mm,
It's something completely different than what most corporations, most companies around the country would think, but that's a good thing. And
mm,
most families, especially the spouses, will recognize it,
mm.
and your team members' kids will thank you years from now. They may think you. In this trip we're taking next week, there's a bunch of younger kids going along on the trip, junior high and high school kids, and they're so excited about it, and I'm excited about the bonding that's going to be
Yes.
happening even within those families.
Yes.
I mean, just the travel part creates bonding.
Yeah. No, you're
It
not
has
wrong.
to, but experiencing, another culture does as well. But I would start there, and then I
Yeah.
would reach out to Peter, reach out to
Yeah.
someone like Hope International or another organization that has real grassroots ties. So
Yeah.
I would make sure you're going to get to the front line, like the front line, yeah, like visit, Natasha and Anastasia and Simeon, and make sure you're going to visit the families and get to know them, hear a little bit about what they're praying for, hear a little bit about what their goals in life are, hear about what they think about and dream about, and what their dreams are. And that's what I would encourage you to take that first step. It doesn't have to be like taking 30 people. It could be
Right.
taking 2 people,
Right.
like 2 years from now. But that would be my
I love that.
my
Think of it as a
suggestion.
replacement and start small. I like that. Peter, what comes to mind when I ask you, hey, what's a small step or a step in this direction that a business owner could take who's thinking about this?
I think Jeff nailed it. Just try it. Try
Yeah.
it. See if it works, and don't bring the whole company.
Right.
Bring a couple people. Please don't bring the whole company. But try it
Right.
and see if it works. And again, I just would then compare the results. Tell me if there is not more joy, more life, more meaning when you come back, as opposed to that versus one of the other trips. I think that we are designed by our Creator for meaning and purpose, and a life that is lived inwardly is not life that is lived to the full. A life that is focused on others, a life that is paying attention to the needy, and then organizations that somehow connect that to meaning, to purpose, to love, to service. I think something really special happens. So yeah, that's it. Try it. See what happens.
Well, listen, thanks so much, both of you, for doing this today. And frankly, just personally, for modeling this generous life for me, and I know you've inspired many others as well. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this week's Generous Business Owner Podcast. Share it with others, and leave your ratings and reviews, and sign up for our newsletter at our website, and we will see you next week. Happy New Year, everybody.
Thanks for listening to the Generous Business Owner Podcast with Jeff Thomas, Alan Barnhart, and Jeff Rutt. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss an episode. You can find the guest contact information in the show notes. Stay tuned for the next episode.